made your own mind up how to become a Eurosceptic, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch me on Facebook. I'm live here in Vienna in Austria, where I've had a very interesting conference today, and it includes an interview with the former Prime Minister and President of the Czech Republic, and he will tell us tonight on this programme why he has become a Eurosceptic. Now, not everybody, of course, agrees with my point of view, including our former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who back in 2005 I seemed to rather upset. And this was his view of my Euroscepticism.
Let me just tell you, sir, and your colleagues, you sit with our country's flag, you do not represent our country's interests.
Oh, I had him rattled, didn't I?
This is the year 2005. This is the year 2005, not 1945. We're not fighting each other anymore. These are our partners, they're our colleagues, and our future lies in Europe.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that I made Tony Blair go absolutely puce with rage and anger. But you see, actually, once again, it's the other side talking about the war, not our side. Look, I'm proud of what those that went before us did. Thank God they did it. Otherwise, the whole of Europe would not be free and living in liberty. And I, frankly, would say to the German ambassador, really, why not retire with some degree of dignity and stop this ridiculous pretense when you said that the modern perception that Germany now dominates the EU is a horrible story. The fact is, Ambassador Amon, Germany does dominate this modern European Union, something that in many parts of Central and Eastern Europe has led people to being concerned. Euroscepticism, in my view, is not rooted back in history. That may be a part of it. Euroscepticism, I think, is because normal people want to live in normal countries, to make their own laws, control their own borders, and be the masters of their own destiny. Enough from me. It's over to you now, of course, because this is LBC, where your opinions are the ones that count. And David from Harwich in Essex, who's a new caller to the show, is on the line. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Nigel. Very good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So, David, go on.
What I would like to say, Nigel, is that I think our path and our destiny differ from the rest of Europe. The reasons for this are as follows. We're an island nation, and we're a proud island nation. And if you look at mainland Europe, most of it has either been under German occupation, communist occupation, or military dictatorships. We haven't. Our way of thinking is different from the rest of Europe. And when we see Europe becoming a federated state with an army and all the rest of it, I just despair. Yeah. I really do. That's what's made the Eurosceptic. I think our destinies are different.
So we've broken away, David. We voted for Brexit, and albeit there are many, and they're debating in the House of Lords as we speak, who would like us not to break away. But let's just say, David, all goes to plan. We break away. What does the rest of Europe do? I mean, do we just say, we've broken away because we believe in freedom and democracy? Don't we want that, those of us that are Eurosceptic, for our European neighbours too?
Absolutely. Well, we're not leaving Europe. We're leaving the European Union.
Well done.
That's the bottom line, Nigel. We're not leaving Europe. People seem to think we're going to cast ourselves off into the North Sea and drift merrily into the sunset. Not at all. We're a major trading partner, and we remain a major trading partner. They need them. They need us as much as we need them.
Yeah, and David, are you proud of what Churchill and our forebears did back in 1940, standing alone?
I'm very proud of it, but I think it's a strange coincidence of fate that two films, Dunkirk and The Darkest Hour, are coming out at this time. It's really, you couldn't make it up, could you?
Well, I don't think there's any coincidence about this at all. I think that what the filmmakers realise is that actually there has been a huge resurgence in our nation for the idea of us having an identity, and part of that identity is looking back to our history, the good bits and the bad bits too. David, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Nicola is calling from Harrogate in North Yorkshire, another new caller to the show. Good evening, Nicola.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
I'm delighted to talk to you, actually. I'm absolutely at my wit's end with this Brexit situation. And really, my call is to plead for you to come back into the main arena and deliver us the Brexit we deserve. And I know I'm not speaking alone. We miss you.
Ah, well, Nicola, that's incredibly sweet of you. And I tell you what, we will, on a future show, debate what I should.
The people I know appreciate what you've done for this country.
Well, that's
honestly,
very sweet of you.
It's amazing. And
But
what I want to say to you is we are all behind you. Go.
well, Nicola, you're a star. Can I bring you back to tonight's debate briefly, if I may?
Yeah.
Is your Euroscepticism based on what Churchill and our forebears did in 1940? Is it some sentimental attachment to the past, the way the German ambassador thinks?
Well, I think it is, yes. Basically, yes, that's where it stems from. But I think from then it's gone very much downhill, and there's very much more recent developments within the EU that have obviously made me vote leave. And so I think it all stems from there, yes. A huge amount of pride in our country. It's nothing to do with being racist, all this stuff that's bandied about. It's about being proud, it's about being British, and it's about protecting what we fought for.
Nicola, I thank you very much for your call and for your passion on a personal and a national level. Well, our last two callers saying they're proud. Yes, they are proud, unashamedly proud, as I am, of what those that went before us did in 1940 and in many other tough times and crises. But there are some living in our country who do not, and not just Mr. Blair, there are some living in our country who do not look upon Churchill and those times with any sense of pride at all. In fact, some of them protested yesterday in London against Churchill, who they saw as a colonialist and as a racist. I'm not making this up. More of that in a moment, but for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 7:15. No, I do think 1940, Churchill, we will fight them on the beaches, Britain standing alone. I do think it does represent our finest hour, with the Royal Air Force doing their bit in the Battle of Britain and everybody pulling together. And thank God they did it, otherwise we'd all be speaking German. And yet, there are some in our country who now take a very different view. A man called Chris Evans has got a cafe in North London. It's a themed cafe. The cafe has got Churchill mugs. It's got model Spitfires hanging from the ceiling. They even have a signature dish called the Winston, a traditional full English breakfast with Cumberland sausage and black pudding. Sounds pretty good to me. And over the course of the last couple of weeks, he's suffered vandalism. Big murals of Churchill on the wall have had graffiti written over them. And yesterday, a mob led by a known Corbynista broke into this cafe. And here's some soundtrack of what they had to say.
We demand that to the owner of the cafe apologise to the local community for their poorly thought and insensitive branding and promptly change it from the menu to the aesthetics and decor of the cafe.
To the customer, we ask you that you boycott this cafe until they take the concerns of the community seriously.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and support each other.
We must love and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and support each other.
We must love and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
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 I'm not quite sure really how I can respond to that, other than by feeling and thinking what a pig, ignorant, stupid group of people these are. They're talking about freedom. Don't they understand if Churchill and the others hadn't done what they'd done, there'd have been no freedom for Europe. And Nazi rule would have gone on for decade after decade because the Americans would not have had a base from which to operate. They talk about freedom. They talk about chains. They denounce Churchill as a colonialist. Well, you know, you can't rewrite history. Things 100 years ago, 70 years ago were what they were. And I have to say, the idea that they now call him a racist and everything else, I am literally appalled that we have these people living in our country today. I'm absolutely appalled. Tell me I'm wrong. Please tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm a sentimental old fool. Tell me Churchill was a monster. Tell me that actually he really is a stain on our history. Maybe you think it would have been better. And I'd love to get those Corbynistas on the line. Tell me it would have been better for us to give in and let the Nazis take over the country. I'd love to hear from you. But I'm also fascinated that Jeremy Corbyn's office, when pressed for an answer on this, haven't responded. Boris Johnson yesterday just called it a disgraceful attack and asked for Corbyn to denounce the actions of these activists immediately, and we've not heard a word. Is this to be the fate of Corbyn's Britain if he wins the next election? No, I don't want to be unfair. Anybody listening to this show from the Labour Party wants to put me straight, it's very easy. It's 0345 60 60 973. I wonder what Duncan in Hanworth makes of those protests yesterday. Duncan, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
Well, I was all right until I played that clip. I just can't believe that people can take that view, Duncan.
Well, I have to say, I'm not a Corbynista. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm with you 100% on this. As someone whose grandparents both fought in the war, and I grew up with the stories of what they went through. So I think the irony of what these people were chanting about their freedom, they don't seem to remember, or they choose not to remember, that a generation of people gave up their lives so that they could do stupid things like this.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I tell you what, you've got me there. That is a fair point. The point about freedom is you have the freedom to be stupid. I do understand that.
Well, and they're incredibly stupid. I mean, that's the only thing that you can say. I don't think Churchill was in no way, shape or form racist. He was one of the few people who at the time was prepared to stand up and do what was needed to be done to save Europe, really. I think that's the other irony.
It is.
But you were asking about what made people Eurosceptic.
Yeah.
So my Euroscepticism doesn't quite go back that far, but it really started when countries started to get locked into the single currency, because we had a core of Europe, France, Germany, the Netherlands, who were desperate to have as many countries into the first wave and then the second wave as possible to make the euro a success. And we're prepared to turn a blind eye to countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, who were manipulating the figures so that they would meet the convergence criteria. You know, it was well documented that they were using figures from the black economy, they were lying about their inflation data, things like that. So right from the start, there were always going to be problems because these countries were being locked in at an uncompetitive rate. And when the financial crisis hit, then that was exacerbated because these countries were all of a sudden unable to do anything to boost their economies because they were locked into a single currency and they were locked in at a very uncompetitive level.
Yeah.
So my Euroscepticism really grew from there.
Okay.
I think
so was the in a sense was us not joining the euro, to keep the World War II analogies going, because after all the German ambassador started it, was not joining the euro for us the great escape?
Absolutely. I mean, we should be thanking George Soros every time we see him, because although at the time, you know, and even since then, hedge funds tend to get a bit of a bad press. If he hadn't broken the pound when he did, and we had continued on, we could well have found ourselves in exactly the same situation where we had no control over our own monetary policy.
Yeah, Duncan, I'm absolutely with you. And isn't it amazing that those that shout loudest today about exits from Brexit and us not leaving the European Union are the very same people who 17 or 18 years ago wanted us to join the euro?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And then you throw in a few other things, like if you remember the Lisbon Treaty, where they wouldn't take no for an answer and made several countries rerun their referendums. I mean, it's almost like we're seeing now with people wanting another Brexit referendum. Where does it stop?
Duncan, we've got to stop it. We voted. We must defy our politicians. I pray to goodness there's no second referendum, but if there is, we'll have to see him off. Duncan from Hamworth, another new caller, thank you. Daniel says, Nigel, for goodness sake, without the help of the USA, everyone in Europe will be speaking German. Not because of Churchill. No, Daniel, it's because Churchill defied the establishment, did not do the deal with Hitler that Halifax and others wanted him to do, that we were able to be that base for the Americans to come and for D-Day to be launched. So actually, it's both. That's the truth of it, isn't it, really? Mark says, if it wasn't for Churchill, we'd be part of a United States of Europe. Well, we nearly were, Mark, anyway. Not an independent nation that we were before we joined the EU. So lots of support for Churchill, lots of support for what happened back in 1940, lots of pride from people. But I'm very, very keen to hear from the Blairites. I'm very keen to hear from those that stormed the cafe yesterday. Tell me we're out of touch, we're sentimental, and we're wrong. Peter is calling from Wimbledon. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I'll hate to say it, but I'm going to burst your bubble and expose you as the biggest con man who keeps brainwashing people. I'm a Blairite. I don't support those people who burst into the cafe yesterday completely. And I would like to say to your followers, to your hardcore followers, the reason I think you are the con men and brainwashing them, because Winston Churchill was one of the few politicians who could see it. Back in those days, the United States of Europe was the future of this nation. And if you never read his speech on 19th of September 1946 in Zurich, I can read it out to you a few lines, where he says, if the Europe were once united in the sharing of its common inheritance, there would be no limit to the happiness and prosperity and glory which it's there of 400 million of people would enjoy. And he's then talking about us coming under as United Nations of Europe. If we are to form United States of Europe, or whatever name or form it may take, we must begin now. That's what he's talking in 1946. And
well,
you
Peter,
are telling
Peter,
British nation,
Peter, hang on, Peter. He gave 3 major speeches around Europe in the year of 1946. You're absolutely right. And he was at that time advocating a United States of Europe because he'd seen in his life constant war between France and Germany and the misery that it caused. But, Peter, and here's the important point, he did not want the United Kingdom to be a member of it.
Quite, no, he did what he how can you praise organization creating a state, United States of Europe, which is European Union, is the form it is now, and then don't want to be part of it? He was saying the small nations will count as much as the large ones and gain their honor by their contribution to the common cause. And the common cause for Europe is peace, because peace is the key to prosperity. And you should realize, Nigel, that the United Kingdom has become the prosperous nation it is while member of the European Union for the last 40 years.
Well, actually, Peter, our growth rates...
anti-immigrant propaganda, because it's nonsense. You know it.
Our growth rates have been lower consistently since we joined the European community than they were before. But, Peter, I just want to make this point to you. Churchill said, if Britain has a choice between Europe and the open sea, she will choose the open sea. He did not want the United Kingdom to be part of whatever European political federation there was. Do you agree with that?
I don't, because you should read his speech.
Fine. Well, Peter, I've read them, and you are wrong. He did not want us to be a member, but hey, it's called open free debate. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. The retiring German ambassador thinks we have this sentimental attachment to Britain standing alone in 1940, and that's why we're Eurosceptic and we're hopelessly out of date, and it won't serve us well now. And I'm asking you, why are you Eurosceptic? Is it because of that or other things? And already we've had the Euro, and there are many reasons, I think, why people have become Eurosceptic, not least of which is the very anti-democratic nature of the European project. But I get an anonymous text here. It says, nothing to say about the leak to BuzzFeed. This is all you have. This is 2018. And you're not just out of touch, you're desperate. This could be Tony Blair texting, I think, couldn't it? There is a leaked report out on BuzzFeed today, coming from a government department, saying that 15 years from now, after Brexit, the British economy could have contracted by 8%. I mean, please do not make me laugh. Are these not the same people telling us that property prices would collapse, the stock market would go through the floor, investment would dry up? I mean, they almost told us a plague of black locusts would descend upon our country. Interestingly, no one quite knew where BuzzFeed had got this from. Where'd the leaked document come from? Had it come from the Department for Exiting the European Union? Had it come from Number 10? We now learn it's come from the Treasury. And I believe, from friends that I've got in and around government, that actually it is the Treasury who are overwhelmingly negative about Brexit, just as they were when George Osborne, remember him, was the Chancellor, telling us there'd be doom and gloom, we'd need emergency budgets. So, yeah, another leak report telling us Brexit will be a disaster from people who have got everything wrong over the course of the last 20 years. Glyn from Swansea says, Nigel, Germany sought to dominate Europe militarily in the 20th century and will economically in the 21st century. It is our historic heritage to oppose this tendency. Well, Glyn, interesting. Somebody in Vienna today said much the same thing to me earlier. And you could argue, Glyn, would it have been better to oppose it by staying within the European Union, or is it better to leave the European Union and point the way for other nations? I feel the latter. Nigel, don't forget, Churchill not only led the fight to free us, but France and Germany from the Nazis. And indeed, you could make the argument that the UK indeed went to war in 1914 for the liberty, independence, democracy and freedom of Belgium. We have a track record of doing these things. If it wasn't for Churchill, Nigel, we'd have lost the war, and they wouldn't be standing in that cafe chanting or destroying private property. It was disgusting, unpatriotic behaviour. I would like to say I agree with Nicola. Come back and help us with Brexit. I haven't gone away. I'm still here. I'm still helping in any way I possibly can. I do think it was disgusting, appalling behaviour in that cafe, but I did get the point that was made to me, that one of the points about liberty and freedom is that you should be allowed and able to go out and protest. So I do understand that. I do get that. But I still think it is a complete fundamental misreading of history done by people who proclaim themselves to be supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, and Jeremy Corbyn as such yet has not denounced their behaviour. I would have thought it's about time he did so. I'm going to go to Keith in Henfield in West Sussex. Keith, what's made you a Eurosceptic?
I became a Eurosceptic just before the Maastricht Treaty, which I spoke against at the annual CBI conference, because I was a member of the CBI at the time. And I was
you must have gone down well, Keith.
I was scared that we were going to move towards federal Europe. But what actually happened later, Nigel, about 10 years ago, my wife and I moved to France. We love Europe.
Yep.
We love all the countries in Europe, but we hate the EU. And when we were living in France, we became very, very aware of how our French neighbours were anti the EU, very much so, how much the common currency had destroyed their local businesses and made life difficult for them and that sort of thing. And I wonder if people realise how much the French are actually very conscious of the way that Germany still tries to dominate. Do you know about the letter that all 14-year-old school children in France receive every year and have to read, that was written by a Frenchman called Guy Moquet from a concentration camp in Belgium, reminding him that he was telling his mother that he was about to be killed by the Nazis. And have you heard of the town called Oradour-sur-Glane, which is still maintained by the French as a memorial to the dreadful things that happened in that village, where the French Nazis rounded up all the women and children in that village, machine-gunned all the men and boys, and burnt all the women and children in the local church. That town is still maintained now as a memorial.
Yes, I've never been to visit it, Keith. I've seen photographs of it, and I have.
It's horrifying. And we could only stand it for about 20 minutes. You know, they've still got old bicycles and old burnt-out cars there. And interestingly enough, some of the most common visitors now there are young Germans who've come to see what their forebears did.
Well, Keith, we all want a peaceful Europe. And the idea in the early 50s of France and Germany coming together round the table to break bread and to start to trade with each other was an utterly sensible thing to do in every way. But what they've done, Keith, is they've moved it on to a full political union where they want to take away nation-state democracy. And you know, your comment about the sort of Eurosceptic attitudes that you met with in France, I'm here in Vienna. You know, there's a lot of Euroscepticism here in Vienna, as there is now, Keith, across the whole of Europe. Just a quick question for you.
Nigel, if I may
just a quick question, Keith, for you. Quick question for you. That your conversion to Euroscepticism happened at pretty much the same time as me, that early 90s period. How were you received by the CBI getting up and making a speech against the Maastricht Treaty?
A lot of people didn't like it, but I had a number of people come up and speak to me afterwards and congratulate me and say they felt the same. At that time, I was a member. I was working for a Swedish company. I was a member of the European Trade Association, and I had a lot of experience about how European rules were being observed throughout Europe or not being observed, particularly perhaps by the Germans and the French. And,
ironically.
This sort of thing was going on. The next thing that I did that really convinced me is I studied every year the European Court of Auditors reports on the European accounts and looked at some of their misspending on, airports that have never seen planes arrive and things like that. Things that we seem to have forgotten about in the whole Brexit debate, about how incompetent and corrupt the EU is.
So you're not Keith, just a sentimental old fool, harking back to 1940. There's actually some logic behind your Euroscepticism.
Yes.
All right, listen, thank you for the call. Great call, very, very interesting. Jan in Norwich says, we decided we were Eurosceptics years ago, but the way we were made to accept all of Brussels' rotten laws. Grace in Romford says, Nigel, I agree 100% what you're saying. Churchill's fight them on the beaches speech still makes me proud to be British. I grew up during the war years when nightly trips to the shelter in our garden were part of our everyday lives. I voted against joining the European project at the start, and nothing so far has made me consider that this was an error. Grace, great text, thank you. Sonia in Colchester, are you a sentimental old fool harking back to 1940?
Well, my dad fought for this country in the war. He was a Pole, and Winston Churchill gave him refugee status after the war. So, Winston Churchill was certainly not a racist. And I hate the EU. I love Europe because I'm half Spanish as well. So, and the reason why I didn't like the EU was after the ERM, and also the city regulations regarding vegetables. In 1998, about the cucumbers.
The curvature of cucumbers regulations, and you know what? We were told, Sonia, by those on the other side, that it was a Euro myth, that we were somehow making it up, lying. And I did for about 4 years. I actually carried a copy of the curvature of cucumbers regulation in my briefcase so I could show it to people. So
I've seen that come about.
So in a sense, Sonia, your Euroscepticism does go back to the war and your father in many ways, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah, because like Winston Churchill, my father said he was a great man. If it wasn't for him, my father got liberated from a Russian concentration camp, and he came back to Britain, and then he fought for Britain in the war, and then after that, Winston Churchill gave 47,000 Poles refugee status in his country, even though we were very poor after the war. So I've got a lot of respect for the man.
Yeah, he recognised the debt of many Polish fighters. And indeed, when we talk about the Battle of Britain, when we talk about those nearly 3,000 pilots that took part, worth remembering there were Czechs and Poles and others, who fought alongside British people flying those planes. Sonia, great call, fascinating. I'm going to tell you about this interview with Václav Klaus, the former president of the Czech Republic. His reason for being Eurosceptic is one that none of you have so far brought up. But then again, his life experiences, the country he grew up in, Czechoslovakia, had very different problems to ones that we've ever seen. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on OBC. It's 7:45. I've been doing a big... Well, there we go, guys. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Great film, amazing story. Amazing story. Barnes Wallis, The Bouncing Bombs. I threw that in for a bit of fun. hoping that the German ambassador is listening, and he would have. We're having a bit of fun with you. We are proud of our past German ambassador, but that's not why we're Eurosceptic. We're Eurosceptic because we want to be an independent, free, self-governing nation. Now, earlier on today, I shared a platform with a man called Václav Klaus. He was, back in the mid-1990s, the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia, which of course then became the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and he went on to become the President of the Czech Republic. And I asked him, what was it that made him a Eurosceptic? And listen to what he has to say. Very carefully.
Well, almost everything. I would start saying that, I am critical of the European Union, probably partly because I spent most of my life in a communist regime. I spent still now something like 70% of my life in a communist Czechoslovakia, and that era was in one respect very bad and dramatic and not very nice and pleasant. On the other hand, we learned something and our eyes sharpened. So when I look at the European Union, I see many things similar with our communist past. I don't speak about the communism under Stalin, but I speak about late communism of the 1980s.
Is this a sort of suppression of freedom of speech? Is it an attempt to stop the nation state being the thing that people owe their loyalty to?
Exactly. Those are the main issues. Freedom of speech, because political correctness is something really fundamentally attacking the freedom of speech, and we feel it very strongly. We were extremely happy becoming free in the moment of the fall of communism, and organizing a sovereign country, originally Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, and I am afraid that we are now in the European Union again, non-sovereign state, and we feel it very strongly.
Powerful stuff, isn't it? Václav Klaus, former Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia, former President of the Czech Republic, saying he lived under communism when his country didn't have sovereignty and freedom, and he fears that the European Union is doing the same thing to his country again, and that's why he is Eurosceptic. Paul in Hanwell texts, the ambassador who thinks he knows the reason for us voting leave. I wonder if he knows why the French would vote leave given the chance, or the Italians, or the Greeks. But then, of course, they won't be given the chance because the EU doesn't like having referendums. Paul, of course, you're right. Euroscepticism is taking place right across the European Union. And the reason is people want to live in countries with their own identities, to feel they're in control of their futures, their leaders are accountable, and yes, that they can control their own borders. That's what I think anyway. I wonder what Craig in Burton thinks, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Craig.
Oh, hi, Nigel. It's nice to talk to you. I think you'd call me an arch Blairite Ramona, so I don't think we're going to be agreeing on many things, other than definitely agree with you in utterly condemning what the Corbyn supporters did in that cafe. It was absolutely gross and offensive and absolutely disgusting, mate. I mean, I want to make a patriotic case for Remain, and my grandfather, he was part of the 7th Armoured Division, so you know very well North Africa. He was in Almain. He was on the D-Day landings. They were the first in, as you probably already know. They liberated Ghent. They also were the 2nd Division to help rescue the 47,000 Jews from Belsen-Bergen. And then he went on to occupy Berlin as part of the forces, and he didn't come home from the war for quite a long time. It was, my mother is also a war widow because of the circumstances in which my father died. So, and a lot of my family with the served in the paras and the like. So, and to say that it's that the Brexit and the Brexit supporters have the Churchill patriotism and the Remainers is a little bit upsetting for us, because there is. And I know you'll disagree with this, Nigel. I'm not going to change your mind, but
I'm listening, Craig. I'm listening.
There's a very strong patriotic case to think that what my grandfather did was to help create a Europe that then created the prosperity and the unity between the countries. That then went on to, we've had 70, 80 years of peace. The communists are out. They're out of Croatia, Yugoslavia. they're out of the Czech Republic, they're out of Poland, and with the European Union, I know we're going to get centre-left, centre-right status quo, but we're never going to see a return to the fascists of Germany and Italy and Spain, and we're not going to see the return of of as long as the European Union still exists. My worry is if it breaks up, then and we see the popular hard right, and I mean to the right of yourselves, the lunatics, and the popular hard left to the left of Jeremy, that we're going to see more, division in Europe.
Well, Craig, look, I do completely understand. And, I've met World War II veterans who've said to me they will Remainers. Not many, to be fair, but I have met some who have said, look, what we saw and what we did was so truly awful that anything is better than that, all right? And that argument was a very powerful argument back in the 1950s. Mr. Juncker, right? The boss of the European Commission, who I regularly take the mickey out of, and he returns it. But if you sit and talk to Juncker, he says, look, when the Germans came in 1940, my dad was a 19-year-old steel worker who was conscripted into the Wehrmacht because the Germans said, you are all Rhineland people, you are all Germanic, was put into a Wehrmacht uniform, sent off to the Eastern Front and wounded. And in fact, Juncker Sr. died age 94 just last year. So Jean-Claude takes the view, anything is better than what went before. But, Craig, what they've tried to do is to abolish the nation state, believing if you abolish the nation state, that means there'll be peace. We tried this in Yugoslavia back in the early 1920s, bringing people together without ever asking them. And my fear, Craig, is this. Number one, provided European countries are democratic and their leaders accountable, they will never fight each other. And my fear is if you take away from people their democratic rights of self-government, it's that has led to parties like Golden Dawn, a neo-Nazi party, which is now the third biggest party in Greece.
I can see that argument, Nigel, but I think you should concede, though, we haven't seen, since we've had the European Union countries, I know there's been the silliness in Yugoslavia and stuff, but there's been peace.
Silliness? Oh, come on, Craig.
We haven't.
Come on, Craig. It was a bit more than silliness. It was a bit more than silliness.
Yeah, no, I know all about being.
And actually, maybe the European Union's recognition of Croatia was one of the things that sparked it off. But hey, that's a whole different debate. I would argue, Craig, that post 1945, there wasn't going to be a major European war in the West. The Germans were not going to cross the Rhine again. They were a completely different country after 1945. If anything kept the peace in Europe, Craig, it was NATO. It was American soldiers, it was nuclear deterrence, and I don't think Brussels has any claim on peace. But Craig, listen, I like people that ring up, have a different philosophical approach, and do it politely and do it well. And that actually, I think, for all of you out there listening to LBC, is proper political debate, and hey, you can make your minds up on this. Look, we've had some real passion here this evening. Matt in Lewisham takes a different view. There is nothing undemocratic about the EU. The EU is one of the most successful trading blocs in the world and will continue to thrive. Churchill himself was in favour of the EU. Yes, he was, but he wasn't in favour of us being a part of it. And actually, I wouldn't say the European Union was undemocratic. I would say that it was anti-democratic. It has a system of law where only the unelected European Commission are allowed to propose legislation. There are lots of reasons, folks, for being Eurosceptic. I do think the German Chancellor's right in one way. Our past is important. But hey, the future is even more important. And I believe a Europe of independent free nation states working and trading together is better than what we've got now. I'll be back in the UK tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Coming up at 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next on LBC, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.